Welcome, everybody, to the latest episode 4 of the Value Add ReelwUrld, the Value Add podcast. And today we are joined, I'm your host, Jan Lucanis, CEO of ReelwUrld founder, and we are joined today by the legendary Jeff Gomez. Jeff is, I was going to write a whole intro because there's so many things that I want to talk to Jeff about, and there's so much feeling behind my experience with Jeff Gomez. Jeff Gomez is a leader's leader. And I think that's something that's really important to point out, that there's leadership, and then there's the leadership that guides leadership. And Jeff very much embodies that. As both a media professional and as a martial artist, Jeff is also a media professional and a martial artist, obviously. But he takes these principles, these subtleties, he can identify what these subtleties are and build systems around them that he can share. And that's what he's done. That's what transmedia storytelling, the infrastructure he's built has provided the global industry of film and television. And I want to unpack a lot of this because a lot of times when you have these subtleties that not a lot of people necessarily know how to see, you may miss them, and they're all around us. So with that said, Jeff Gomez, the world's leading transmedia producer, the godfather of the whole transmedia groupie movement. I am one of those groupies. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for being here, making time.
Jan Lucanis, thank you. And thank everybody who showed up for the podcast today. Jan, it's a pleasure to make it onto your show. I've been listening, and I love your approach, your angle. The fact that you seek wisdom and practical applications for sometimes esoteric concepts or highly technological or technical concepts, and that's why I certainly wanted to do the show.
Well, it's a huge deal to have you here, and everybody, just so everyone knows, Jeff is also an advisor to me personally, but also to ReelwUrld, our company, ReelwUrld, the world's first social film studio. The whole concept of making movies and shows with community participation, where the community is actually starring in the shows, and that's what we're doing right now. We're actually raising with our first equity crowdfunding campaign on WeFunder right now, wefunder.com/ReelwUrld. So you can always check us out, and that's ReelwUrld to see what we're building. And what we're building is something that Jeff has been predicting in media at least since 1999. So, and I tell everybody that this is not our idea. The greatest minds have contemplated systems where we all work together to tell stories, because that's actually how humanity grew, was telling stories together. And so before we dive into all of that, and Jeff and I and our team, we've done so many things in the past. There's a wonderful New York Comic-Con panel called Your Cinematic Universe that you can watch, where Jeff really breaks down so much. Ahmed Best from Star Wars is on there as well, and a bunch of other wonderful people, Danny Fingeroth from Marvel. But Jeff really breaks down the humanity's trajectory across storytelling and where we are now. But I would love for people to get an understanding of what transmedia storytelling is. And if I hope I remember correctly, because how I recall you articulating it greatly impacted my life and my career. And you said once that transmedia is the orchestral use of media to get an audience to follow a story across different media platforms. Am I correct here, or would you make changes to that description?
More or less it, yeah. Each medium is like an instrument, and you're designing your narrative, your story world, to be a combination of those media to create something larger even than the sum of its components. Transmedia storytelling is exemplified by what we're seeing with the Star Wars universe across multiple media, and with the Marvel Cinematic Universe across things like Disney Plus and theatrical Marvel movies. It's further defined by the fact that now you can't do any of that without an architecture for dialogue. You have to communicate with your audience, and your audience needs to communicate and participate with you. Now, that's something that's tougher these days. And by the way, Jen, we made a little bit of history at that panel at New York Comic Con, because you provoked me to say that we, as media companies, should not wage war with our customers. And what wound up happening was that the new CEO of the Walt Disney Company, Bob Chapek, he delineated 3 brand new pillars of wisdom for the Walt Disney Company. One was to leverage new technologies. One was to maintain the best possible storytelling. But the third and most important was to bring the audience back to the center of the Disney universe. Disney will no longer be waging war with the consumer. And I found that was very, very interesting. I mean, the language was very similar to the language we used, the language you've been publishing on LinkedIn, and the language I've been talking about for quite a while. So we had an impact.
Jeff, that's if folks haven't, you can see it on our WeFund page or on the youtube.com, the Real World YouTube channel. There's a wonderful little remix commercial of that one moment. And I think there's one of those dun, 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 horns,
Yes.
from like a reggae song that we threw on it. That's amazing to hear. And this is, I think that's a great example of the kind of what a leader's leader does. And Jeff, I defer to you to that for that, because of how much you've impacted not just what we do at ReelwUrld and what we're accomplishing at Justice for Hire, but just so much of the industry. And I think that this is a great segue into my next question, because it's transmedia storytelling that you've very much pioneered, and you identified when we met. You and I met at Comic-Con, and I wasn't sure. I think it was San Diego.
That's right.
And you came by and you looked at our Comic-Con booth where we had all of our Justice for Hire comics and a whole bunch of other titles for Creative Impulse, my production company. And we were selling, each comic came with a free DVD. And the DVD had live action content that tied into the comic book storyline. And we were doing this independently. This is just something that natively made sense. And, when you talk about the orchestral use of transmedia, and I think about how all of this stuff is essentially music, and music is essentially math. And if you're really looking at the writing on the wall, you can see the equations for what's coming next. And I think that when it comes to that site, it requires a significant amount of very unique intelligence to recognize its value. And I'm wondering, because that intelligence is so rare in Hollywood or any industry, because it requires an understanding of many different positions and in the process of producing a story, I'm wondering, in your experience, what has been, have you encountered the Hollywood fear? I know that we've talked about this in little, I in my experience have come across people saying yes to me, not because they understand, but because they're afraid of being wrong. Yeah. And I think that's always very, very interesting, because I want their understanding, and understanding is really a bridge that needs to be built. And so I'm consistently working on that. I think that's what we're really working toward with ReelwUrld. But in your experience, what is your experience with Hollywood fear, and how have some of the world's biggest brands and world governments been able to recognize the power of your transmedia approach to become your clients?
Well, let's break it down just a little bit, Jan. I'm going to go back to this notion that it takes a genius or brilliance to come up with this stuff. I'll go you one better, Jan. It takes love to come up with this stuff. It takes love, and here's why. Because when I was a little kid, not that bright, but I loved the things that I loved. So if I was watching the Planet of the Apes movies in the 1970s, right? And I loved them. And sequentially, those movies made some kind of sense, right? They seem to exist in the same universe. There was a continuity to those movies. But then I watched the cartoon series and noticed that there were dinosaurs on the Planet of the Apes. Or I watched the TV series and noticed that there were things about the world of Planet of the Apes that were in no way in sync with the movies. I was disappointed. I was like, well, yeah, this is a multi-platform property, but nobody cared enough to make them consistent, to make the world resonant with itself across different media platforms. And I found that disappointing. So all that transmedia storytelling really was a wish for somebody to care enough about the worlds that I loved to make sure that they made sense, that they were consistent across these different media. And that's just not the way the business worked. That's not the way that licensing and merchandising worked. So growing up and getting a job with a comic book company, when asked to adapt a Turok from the comics, the Valiant comics, to the video game, I wanted some consistency. This is the same guy who's in the comic book, and this world is an expansion of the world of the comics. And the content that was going to be on the website, which the web was a brand new thing in the early 1990s, that was going to tell more stories that were tied into both the video game and the comic books. And you know what? The fans went nuts. The fans appreciated the connections between these three media and between the stories that were being told. There were different stories that were being told. They loved it so much, the website crashed, so the convincing that was necessary, because nobody understood what I was doing and nobody cared. What do you mean you're making it all in the same universe? It's different media. Nobody cares. I care. And guess what? The fans care. And the video game franchise sold over $400 million worth of video games in the 1990s, more than any blockbuster movie or anything like that. So that model, it still was strange, but I was able to replicate it, to repeat it a few times. And that's what alerted companies like the Walt Disney Company to come to me and say, hey, this Turok and this Magic the Gathering thing and this Hot Wheels thing, there's a method to your madness. Can you apply that method to Pirates of the Caribbean? And that, of course, launched Starlight Runner Entertainment, my company, and we started dealing with these Hollywood blockbusters. So it was money that ultimately compelled Disney to investigate that model. And it's interesting that Disney has become the best of the huge movie studios and media companies to leverage transmedia storytelling.
Jeff, that was a spectacular response. And I love this. I love that you said love, because love is, it can sound cheesy at times, but what it really is a massive amount of data. And like, there's just so much data when it comes to love, your feeling of love toward a person, place, thing, experience, etc. And I think that one of the most powerful things is being able to articulate that love through your experiences. You've through a person's personal experience. Like I am trained through my experience to find a way toward love. And how
Exactly.
can I please, please.
Jan, it's love and then data. I could always figure out how a video game is produced. I could always ask somebody about a feature film production, or I could read Variety or any filmmaking books or things like that. That's hard data. That's information that I absorbed. But the motivation to pursue multiple media platforms, production processes, so that I understood how transmedia storytelling could work and how it can be timed and how it can be cross collateralized to allow for licensing and merchandising. All of that I had to learn the hard way, man, just asking a million questions of a million people. For all of us, the biggest lesson, if you get any lesson out of this, people love to be asked questions. If you're genuinely interested and you ask a professional a few questions, boy, they love to hear themselves talk. So you learn, you just learn. So again, not so much genius, Jan, passion, and then being only smart enough to be able to retain the information that is given to me, and having the imagination to then apply this notion of transmedia to the information that I had.
Jeff, that's what a genius says, people. It's not genius. It's simple. Well, I mean, I think this is super interesting in how you built processes, and you've built teams around these processes, and you've been able to make them work repeatedly. So I'm wondering, how do you choose, let's say, a team member, and especially when it comes to someone who is capable of not only holding, I'm wondering what is the things that you look for someone who can hold the data but also has the love, especially when it comes to world building.
That's a great question, and I don't get asked that enough. And it's a helpful question, because your audience could be members of such a team, if not my team, then someone else's, that are becoming involved in this kind of production. It's a team that ReelwUrld needs, for example. And it goes like this. I always saw myself as a creator. So when I was creating the multi-platform implementation for Turok, I was just thinking what my fantasy of Turok would be. Same with Magic the Gathering. I was able to come up with the world of Corindor, which was the world of Dominaria, early Magic the Gathering content, because I had created that world in a Dungeons and Dragons campaign. So I had notebooks and tons and tons of maps. I had all kinds of stuff already there, and I had to figure out how to adapt it to become compatible with the Magic the Gathering rule system and the cards and the characters on the cards and so forth. So with regard to creating a methodology which eventually would become a system of transmedia concepting, development, and production, that arrived, believe it or not, because I had to understand. There was some clients came along and said, well, what exactly are you doing? What exactly am I paying for? What's the process by which I can measure your progress and my success? So I had to sit down and think, well, I was an artist. I was just telling a story using different media, mixed media, storyteller. Now you want me to tell you that I'm worth $1 million because I'm giving you a series of deliverables. I hated the word deliverables. So I had to sit down and break it down. I had to turn art into a process, a system. And then $1 million job is not Jeff Gomez and a couple of buddies sitting in an office coming up with cool race car drivers. It's this is Halo. This is the Halo universe. So we have to put together a team, because it's dozens of hours of video game content, thousands of pages of documentation, some of it highly technological, some of it super science fiction-y and a little bit out of my wheelhouse. So I had to break down my own thought process to show them what those deliverables would be. Assessment, innovation, mythology, transmedia strategy, rollout. Those are my 5 little subsections, and then each one is broken down to like a dozen or more subsections, right? And then I had to think about who I can find who can help me do the job, right? So not only did you need to be able to write really well, you needed to understand the subject matter, which was awesome, because a great writer who understood Halo fundamentally, that's their dream, to be able to come write about Halo with a professional team. So that was aces. But on top of all of that, they had to understand video game development. They had to understand a certain kind of technical writing. I'm not asking you to write about Master Chief's life story. I'm asking you to write about the arc of Master Chief's progress across dozens of years of space-time. That is a different mindset, and so forth. So I had to go out and find people like that. And little by little at Starlight Runner, I assembled a core team that did. And after that, depending on the subject matter, we mixed and matched people. So I would go out and recruit. We found EJ Kulakundis at a comic book shop. He was playing trading card games, Yu-Gi-Oh! And he mentioned that he knew every single episode of Ultraman that ever existed, front to back, every character, every item, and every ultra, and every kaiju, every monster. I said, would you come here a minute? and his fantasy job was fulfilled, because EJ is now in charge of Ultraman Connection, the website that is the Ultraman center of the universe. So I love doing that. I love cultivating talent that has these strange little specialties, these nerdy, almost neurodiverse specialties, and putting them on a team and going out and accomplishing incredible things.
Jeff, I think that's another example of leading with love that we can all learn from.
There's a rug that ties the room together, people.
When I hear you talk about all of these, you're in a very unique position as a leader's leader. And that position, from my understanding, puts you in a place where there's a lot of data coming to you at all times. And because of this, and I feel like this applies to literally any discipline. For me, as a whether it's in martial arts, taking the best I can from any system to integrate it into my own, which is something that Bruce Lee was really one of the first people really saying that in media. And I apply that martial thinking to media. That's like martial arts is a massive way. It essentially has been my gateway into the media world. Growing up with a father and a mother who both trained in martial arts, but my dad, was a comic book critic, and was Jim Shooter's protege. So I spend a lot of time thinking about how how to practically apply an idea with lateral thinking to any particular space that I might be in my life. So I think this is one of the things this concept of love to me really makes me think about is intimacy. And when you look at world building and what's been happening, what story is, if I think about a weapon in martial arts, like a weapon is actually just a tool that we are placing it, we're framing it as a weapon for a particular use. And so what is the use of story? What is has been the use of cinema, from mid 90s, when Sid Field's book really started becoming, standardized across the Hollywood system as the way to format screenplays, to where we are now, where the thing that feels the most resonant to so many of us is this cinematic universe model, and how this cinematic universe model relates to how it connects all of us, because we see ourselves as the heroes on screen, or we want to, and therefore, certain decisions are made to help make everyone feel included. And of course, we at ReelwUrld feel that the next step is actually including the audience. But when it comes to intimacy, I feel that intimacy is different than world building. As a matter of fact, I would say that intimacy, Miyazaki, is intimacy to me, while, let's say, the Marvel's Eternals is world building. And I'm interested in your thoughts on the difference between, or is there a difference between intimacy and world building, and or the connection you see, and how we could get better at bringing more intimacy into world building.
Well, you covered three major topics there, Jen, and let me have at them, if you will. I wanted to mention, because of the unique nature of who you are, my experience with martial arts. I grew up in a chaotic environment. Violence was something that I was familiar with on a day-to-day basis. I'm stunned at the difference in the lives of my child and her friends and so forth, compared with what mine was like, where we're getting hit on a day-to-day basis, or being assaulted verbally, was just routine. You didn't know any other way, and that wasn't just absorbed as if I was some kind of sponge. There was an anger response to it, even if I didn't express it. So I was, there was an enormous amount of rage in me as a youth. In Flushing, Queens, in the late 1970s, I was attacked on the street by a gang with some friends of mine. We were badly assaulted, and that anger, it just cut it, man. And I went to Northern Boulevard and found Tokutai Karate Do, a sensei, Toyotaro Miyazaki, and I took up Shotokan karate. I did it secretly on my own, and I became a disciple. My mentality going in was vengeance. No one will do this to me again. They will feel my fist, but one of the most wonderful things Sensei Miyazaki told me was that if you actually have to fight, you have failed. I'm giving you these tools to preserve your life and to protect the people around you, if there is no other choice. But there should always be a choice. You are smart enough Jeffrey, um, to to get out of this kind of situation without having to resort to striking someone. And it's funny. I was with him for years, and and that enabled me. It gave me the confidence that the anger, look, it doesn't dissipate. It doesn't really go away, but it is quelled by the sense of security, the personal sense of confidence that I had given these tools, these martial arts tools. And I see this, Jen, with you and your pupils, your students. So when I walk in the door and James Cameron is in a bad mood, or he's doubting me, questioning my opinion or my creative contribution to his work, I noticed that people were afraid. They were afraid for their jobs, and I would see that anger well up in me. I would feel it, and then I would just open up the tool chest and just see that they were there, Jen. Just see that they were there and go, you know what? I'm going to ask you a question, Jim. And I would just ask him questions. That's all. And those questions caused him, he loved having questions asked of him, smart questions. And he would go, oh, I guess you got a point there. He would never admit that he was wrong. but he would say, oh, all right, that's interesting. And we'd move on. So the anger was enough to push me forward to be able to stand up to power, and to doubt, and often to people who made fun of me and said transmedia is bullshit. You're just making that up. They literally told that to me, Jen. You just, there's nothing. Transmedia is thin air, they told me. So so it allowed me to move on. And you know what the next big challenge was, Jan, the more recent one. Hey, I think story's changing. I think we're moving out of the Sid Field modality of storytelling, because the world wants to participate. The world wants their perspectives seen. Sid Field is about this. It's simplified heroic journey, conflict, 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 conflict. You know what that does? It either means that the good guy wins or the bad guy wins, and we can't have that anymore in our lives, Jen. If it's just one or the other, we are going to destroy ourselves, because every single one of us now has a voice in social media. I'm right, you're wrong. We're driving each other crazy with this assertion of rightness against one another. So we need a different storytelling modality, and that is where we're getting story worlds. And that's inclusive of cinematic universes, but not but it's not only cinematic universes. There aren't actually too many cinematic universes, but there are more movies and series about systemic society systems. There are narratives where each character represents a different aspect or facet of a rich, complex system that is in jeopardy, that is flawed. There's a big problem in that system, and if that problem is not solved, the system is going to collapse. That means the good guys lose, the bad guys lose, the people who have no idea what's going on, they lose too, right? Winter is coming. Winter's going to kill you whether you're a king or a pauper. right? And so that's what's really interesting to me, Jen, the fact that our entire storytelling system, our way of telling stories is starting to evolve. And that evolution, to get to the third part of your question, involves intimacy, because we cannot solve every problem by smashing ourselves against one another. We can't. If you do that, it may look pretty, but because everyone likes a fight, right? But it is not going to ultimately repair the system. You know what will? Intimacy. We have to learn to love one another. And the act of reconciliation, the act of coming together despite these differences, that's dramatic storytelling. That's awesome. That's new kinds of storytelling. And that's what I'm so excited about, Jen. And it's what makes me excited about what you're doing.
Well, Jeff, I mean, first of all, you just keep coming with these epic answers, and that really connects to, I think, our personal how we met. You and I met on Justice for Hire. Justice for Hire was a comic book series. We had live action. It was my senior thesis coming out of NYU. And I shot a bunch of stuff around it, kind of built a small story world around it, and we made some waves in the comic book industry. But when it came to expanding it out and making the property bigger, so many things didn't feel right. And it caused me to not only turn down a bunch of offers in the Hollywood system, but also to essentially build and then leave behind various, like 16 screenplays, literally 16 different screenplays, several of which you read.
Yeah.
And until coming to the place where I realized that this can't be done. I can't say what needs to be said. It has to be said with others.
That's right.
And so in 2018, we rebooted the entire concept and said, we're going from the brick and mortar world and bringing it to the social world. So therefore, Justice for Hire needs to be an app rather than a family business of vigilantes being hired. It has to be an app where anyone can be hired, because then we can allow everybody to tell their story. And the personal journey, I think you watched me and helped guide me through the personal journey of going through my own anger and self-hatred in certain ways, and a desire for the fight, but being in conflict with myself because the fight is not the answer. But I'm a martial artist that wants to shoot action scenes. So how am I going to reconcile these two things? And that journey has been, I have to say, incredibly purifying, because the more I've watched, and we have several of our Justice for Hire heroes. For those who don't know, justiceforhire.app, you can go there right now and become a part of our cinematic universe. It's the first show we're producing with the community at ReelwUrld. And a bunch of our cast members are on here right now. And watching their stories, watching people produce weekly episodic content, because there is an infrastructure that says, hey, anything you do within this set of rules is canonical. So therefore, anything you do matters. So tell a story and let's tell let's build a world together. That has been so healing for me personally that I couldn't even, it's hard for me to look at the character that I used to play in the previous iteration of Justice for Hire, because it's so not who I am anymore. And so I had to even create my own new version of myself for this world so that I can exist.
Took a little time, people. Took a little time.
Well, you know how many letters of recommendation I got from Jeff? I'm like, Jeff, I need this. I just need one more. But this is, I mean, I think you touched on you're alluding to it, but I would love to plainly say it: the collective journey. Can you tell us what the collective journey is? Because I think that's something that people need from your mouth.
From the time we emerged from caves, in human prehistory. Um, we are hardwired to think in a narrative circle, right? That is the hero's journey cycle of storytelling. It comes from the fact that the world was an incredibly dangerous place. You were raised to be able to leave the cave with some training, and you knew how scary and dangerous it was, so you hesitated, but the call is irrefutable, and an elder trained you in what it is that you needed to do. And then eventually you had to go out. You had to go out and get the food. You had to go out and get the fire. You had to go out and get other people so that you can propagate, right? And that journey that you made was dangerous. It was filled with survival, direct physical conflict, mental strife, a trauma. Eventually, you either died or you gained the boon, the treasure. You brought it home. You provided it to your community, and you were celebrated for doing so. Right? That is the basis for almost every story around the world throughout human history. It is the monomyth, the hero's journey. Now, I have to acknowledge that there are some cultures that don't necessarily abide by that specific cycle, but by and large, the vast majority does. The hero's journey cycle was popularized in Hollywood during a series of conversations between George Lucas and Bill Moyers about the making of Star Wars. Because George Lucas had studied Joseph Campbell, a mythologist who celebrated the hero's journey, and what happened was Hollywood was like, there's the magic formula. I'm going to knock it off. I'm going to copy it. There were books written about the hero's journey. The writer's journey is one of them by Vogler, which is great, by the way. But it simplified the hero's journey, which used to be very rich and sophisticated. And so you started to see a very formulaic modality of storytelling in Hollywood movies, TV shows, commercials, and so forth. So I'm not
Sid Field then further.
Well, of course, and look, they, in terms of being analytic, people like Sid Field and his ilk were brilliant. They told you how to write a screenplay based on these narrative models, and also based on the language of film. So I'm not knocking any of them. However, the advent of new media platforms like social media, like video games, and so forth, they introduced a number of modalities, I call them. These are story models that don't follow that simple heroic cycle, particularly the Xerox of a Xerox of a Xerox copy of the hero's journey. Our story has become nonlinear. Our story has become porous. We're able to speak back to the storyteller. That was never possible in all of the history of anything. That one human being can tell the president of the United States to screw off. I'm asserting my story on your story. It's a stunning development, and so I began to observe, and this isn't just in movies. This is in geopolitics, in the way humans behaved. It's no longer a circle; it's a lightning bolt. The collective journey is a narrative that may start in one place, but with stunning speed exists in many places, right? It's going somewhere. Lightning goes from one point to another point. but it's brilliant. It's incandescent. It's filled with power, and it has multiple branching narratives. So a collective journey is, you can be a storyteller and tell a collective journey story, but you have to take into consideration the fact that your audience can speak back to you. There's an architecture for dialogue, and also that the story you're telling is not the simple circle. It is a system in danger, a system in need of repair. So in order to tell that story well, you need to understand who those characters truly, deeply, genuinely are. You have to love them, Jan. Even the terrible characters, you have to understand where they're coming from, because they represent a certain point in the system. If you destroy that point, the system is only further damaged. And guess what? Someone's going to come and take their place. Right. So so what needs to happen in collective journey stories is that people need to cross paths within this system and somehow reconcile, somehow apply their diverse perspectives to one another that projects a third perspective, a third mind that is the solution, the methodology to repair the system. Does that mean there's no fighting in collective journey stories? There can be plenty of fighting. There can be violence. It can be, a horror movie or whatever. The shift in mentality, though, is that we're dealing with a story world that has to reconcile with itself, not a single good person against a single evil person.
Jeff, there's two things there are a few things that pop in my mind with that. One is recently in No Time to Die. I'm I'm watching like the little the DVD of it that the Writers Guild sent over, and half watching it, and Jeffrey Wright's character says that it's hard to tell the difference between the heroes and the villains, huh? And I was shocked. I was shocked that that line was in there, because it was, to me, it was an example of quality, the quality of not to say that I'm a James Bond fan. I like GoldenEye and I played the N64 game, but it was referencing something else in culture that I believe that something of the that has the history that James Bond has doesn't need to resort to. And I'm listening to your to this concept of these two characters within a system, a collective journey model that you've identified, coming with these two separate perspectives and coming out with a third perspective. And that just reminds me of, I've had to have this conversation so many times, the spectrum between, right, wrong, or good and evil, these perceived opposites, the yin and yang, and finding that place, the point of equilibrium that actually exists above them both. And that the pendulum is going to swing to either extreme. So you have to climb up the pendulum to that top point right. to rise above to rise above the perceived difference. And I think that's it's just that idea pops in my head when you talk about these characters coming from different perspectives and the reconciliation that needs to happen.
Yes, that's a great perception. That's very much what I'm talking about, Jen.
I think that's, especially when I think about Justice for Hire, we have folks on here who have been instrumental. We do these monthly hero meetups, and we talk about character, we talk about story, we talk about the trajectory. I'm about to start live editing this week. Season 1, our season 0 is already out, but season 1 is going to, we're going to live stream on Twitch, and people can sit there and watch me, like, cutting, actually editing the series. And figuring out how to tie these stories together in a way that honestly we haven't seen before. I think we see it more in documentary filmmaking than we've seen it in the traditional heavily marketed studio fare. So there's something there that hasn't been seen, and I often reference a moment that I had in NYU when David Irving, who became the chair of the dean of NYU when I was in film school there. David was reading. I was half asleep in class, and he was giving a speech. And I love David, but I was half asleep during his speech, and I woke up and he was reading Louis Buñuel, and he was reading a quote from Louis Buñuel that talks about that I have not been able to find. I even downloaded a few of his books trying to find it. That when cinema is understood for what it actually is, that the true light of cinema will shine on the world, and people will understand each other. And I woke up when I heard that, and I asked the guy next to me, I'm like, did you hear that? And I raised my hand, like, could you just repeat that line? And he said it again. It blew my mind. Because as a martial artist, I look at a weapon as an extension of the body. And coaching the US Tai Chi push hands team and on the world-class level, and looking at it from the perspective, Tai Chi is not a martial art. To me, it is a martial art, but it is a container, as any system is. And within that container, I look at it for breath work, body mechanics, and visualization. And when I apply breath work, body mechanics, and visualization to anything, I understand it more deeply, and I understand how other people might be receiving that thing or engaging with it. So when I look at cinema in the same way as an extension of the body and mind and spirit, I look at how the distance between your face and the phone and what's happening in that space, or your face in the computer screen, or your face in the movie theater screen. And there's something profound that happens when we open ourselves up to entertainment. We let our guard down, and we allow so much in that, and some of which we should not allow, some of which we need higher standards as a culture and a society to actually and we need to identify what those things are, so we can together say, yeah, we need to do better. And I think that's actually something that's happening right now that's really beautiful across cultures, that people are starting to say, hey, you know what, we need something different. And I think at times, I think the new Spider-Man movie is a great example of this. They're rather than about hurting the villains, it's about healing them. And I thought that was beautiful. I personally wanted the movie to be another hour, so I didn't get enough. But I really appreciated it. And so I deeply, your words deeply affect me here. And
Jan, let me talk about, because we're getting some questions about collective journey and applications in the real world.
Yeah, I wanted to open up to some questions as well.
And I wanted to talk to you about cinema. One of my earliest experiences alone in the movies was to go and see Destroy All Monsters, a Godzilla movie at the Loews Delancey, and I summoned up the bravery to walk all those blocks at like 6 or 7 years old to go see that movie, and in the theater.
You were 7 walking by yourself?
Oh, sure.
Oh, wow.
in the Lower East Side of Manhattan.
Wow.
in 1969, 1970. That's the way it was. In the theater, as the lights started to dim, I looked over a couple of rows over, and I saw the person in class who tormented me the most. He was horrible to me. Truly vile to me. And I thought, what is he doing here? I love this. How could he possibly want to see this movie? And the lights went down, And the movie went up, and by the light of the movie, I could look over every once in a while, first out of fear, but then out of fascination with the fact that he loved what he was watching. Godzilla was kicking ass. There was flying saucers. The three-headed monster landed. It was awesome. And he thought it was awesome too. And I thought to myself, that was the first time that I understood the power of cinema, because no matter what my difference with this kid was, we both could look at that screen and with awe and marvel at what we were seeing. We were seeing dreams manifest themselves. I never forgot that, Jen. And many years later, I started thinking about how about the fact that I was working on these giant blockbuster movies and actually having some kind of impact on their content. You know, people were listening to what I had to say, or they were following my mythology documents, or what have you. And so I was in effect putting messaging into these movies that were being seen by millions of people. And suddenly I got this overwhelming sense of responsibility. If that's the case, well, I better have something important to say. The elements that I'm putting better be based on aspirational values, that had better be based on themes of things like reconciliation or love, or something like that. They can be full of action and excitement and so forth. Those are symbols for the conflicts we all feel within ourselves, but they need to be thought through carefully, because so many people are seeing this. And when I realized how powerful that could be, I began to write about the fact that systems can be impacted, social systems can be impacted by stories across multiple media platforms, concerted stories, orchestral or symphonic narrative can be played across entire populations in ways that can make them wake up a little bit, feel inspired a little bit, in ways that tap into, that resonate with their cultural mythology, a source of pride, a source of value. And I began to write about that. And then I began to apply this kind of transmedia collective journey narrative to population activation. So these were efforts on the part of government and non-government organizations to influence the behavior of populations so that we have less extremist thinking, that we have less crime, less violence. It was done in the name of kind of progressive, fundamental human rights and values. And we did that, Jan, and it worked. I did it in Mexico, I did it in Colombia, I did it in Australia, Canada, and we've done it. We're doing it right now here in the United States, and to address the issue of polarization. And it's really, really exciting because it does work. The collective journey narrative modality, combined with transmedia storytelling, can impact a whole people simultaneously and in a positive way.
What Jeff's saying is that he saved the world multiple times.
I wish. But good things did happen.
This I want to open it up to questions, but I have to say one more thing about this: the moment with you in the theater and the looking at the kid. I identify so deeply with that because of, I got beat up by a family. when I was 9 years old, and I stopped doing martial arts until I was like 15 because I thought martial arts didn't work, and I was defending a friend when I did it, and I thought I was standing up for the right thing, and got beat up by an entire family while adults watched, and no one stopped it. And that planted a fear inside of me that it took me years and years to identify that that I have to draw, that I started drawing strength from is you can be there and no one will stop it. It could be happening and no one will stop it. And so there's a personal responsibility for strength that I had to draw from that moment. And if I didn't draw the strength, I would only be drawing the reminder of the fear, how terrifying it could feel to simply walk outside amongst people. But that same pain helped me identify with moments that I think you articulated really wonderfully. James Cameron walking in the room. Everyone else is afraid of their job. They're losing their jobs by saying something real. But you have the ability to recognize that fear, recognize the fear inside yourself, the fear in others, to recognize that you have the tools, that you're properly equipped to handle that, which the martial arts helped you with, among other things. Nice. And then you have the creativity to ask the questions that help guide the person who might be bringing that energy, that disruptive energy, to a place of understanding, of matching minds, and to achieve that new outcome. And I think that's,
Jen, that you're absolutely right, because guess what? The next day I go, oh, so how'd you like it? And he goes, what? And I go, the movie. And he started talking about it. And I asked him a dozen questions. And you know what? He'd probably never been asked a question with that level of interest in his whole life. And guess what? He wouldn't leave me alone. After that, he was my best friend. Look, I wasn't his best friend because he was still an awful person, but he never bothered me again.
Well, little insider stuff on James Cameron there.
I'm talking about the kid in the Lois Delancey.
Oh, okay. I thought you were talking about James Cameron.
Well, yeah, James Cameron too, but no, the kid in the Lois Delancey. How'd you like the movie?
Never bothered me again, Jan. All right, so first question we have Andra.
Hi, Jeff. Thank you so much. I could listen 2 hours you talking, but I realized you mentioned something on a few occasions in this hour alone, and I'm wondering, it's about the architecture of dialogue. Yes. So in this world, the question is, how did the architecture of dialogue was disrupted by social media? So how social media disrupted, because everyone now is an expert. Everyone, if I'm right, you must be wrong. And if you're right, I must be wrong. Because it's only one absolute truth. And not usually none of us is holding it, because it's about that third instance, how you said. But I'm wondering if, because it's not an if, it's a fact that the architecture of dialogue was disrupted by social media. How technology, I have to ask, is my field, how technology can bridge the gaps that were created, and how can it heal without creating even more rupture and even more distance, but just.
Andra, I'm so glad you asked this question.
Thank you.
But I want to be honest with you. It isn't social media or technology, it's people. People can be terrible. I began to notice a problem about 12 years ago. It was the way that social media and the internet were being used in Russia. They were purposefully placing false narratives into the social media as well as the traditional media platforms, and those narratives, they contradicted themselves morning, noon, and night. It was bizarre because the people thought that the government was crazy. You know, they thought they were inept, clownish. They laughed at Putin for doing this, and the problem is that if you do this for too long, somebody is going to be on the side of the argument that comes out in the morning, and somebody is going to be on the side of the argument that comes out at night, and they're the opposite. So people started to fight with each other. They believed two different things that were coming out of the same source. And what this did was it created chaos, and it destabilized the will of an entire people. Ultimately, it caused conflict, and they began fighting with each other. There was polarization in Russia, and that lasted for years and years and years. Right? We're only in year number 5. It went for 10 years until, you know what happened? The people said, Vlad, just take care of it. Whatever you say, I'm tired. I'm exhausted. I don't want to deal with this anymore. Take complete control. You've got it. And that's what happened. That's how in the 90s you had glasnost, and you had the freedom wave that crossed all of the Soviet bloc and caused the fall of the Soviet Union. Then there was a so-called free Russia for about 5 years, and then this methodology was created. It was manufactured, Andra, and then it was automated, and then it was turned against us. Do you see? So there are bad actors who are purposefully muddying the waters and creating major problems and trying to unmoor us from our understanding of reality. And we are falling for it hook, line, and sinker. It doesn't matter what side you're on, conservative, liberal, whatever, Republican, Democrat, it doesn't matter. We're all getting bushwhacked by this awful situation. What is the solution? We need to understand what's happening. If any of you here had ever had a best friend who was being gaslighted by their boyfriend or girlfriend, you had to be very careful with how you broke the news to your friend. You could lose that friendship because they always, side with their lover. It has to be demonstrated. We have to see it with our own eyes, how exactly this is happening. And I think that there are methods for teaching media literacy to us as adults, but even more importantly to young people, because they're really being pounded by this. We must figure this out. If we don't, it is self-terminating, Andra. We will, if you examine why civilizations fall, one of the final symptoms in the collapse of civilization is people do not understand what is real and what is not real. And so that is a systemic crisis. And it's why things like collective journey modality, it's why I'm so passionate about teaching it, because it is the training mechanism by which we will come to understand when we are being deluded.
Thank you so much. Just one thing, it's like so amazing to see that if people were gathered I hope, and my prayer is for ReelwUrld and justice, what we're building with Justice for Hire. And thank you so much for being an official advisor. It's like people were gathered around the fireplace to tell a story. I wish that the same way our community gathers around the app and tells that story. So for me, it's an honor to build that app and to just have to give people the tool to use it and to tell that story. So thank you. If it's just a 1% of the solution, then I'm
Sure.
happy.
I can't wait to see what you do with it, Audrey. I can't wait.
Well, it's coming up in the editing session. Jen knows more. He can talk about that. Cannot wait to see. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Andra, for that question. And we have Nick Nikitas. I hope I said that properly. I don't
Nick, I know Nick. I go, but way back. And I'm so thrilled to see you here, Nick. And you'll look fantastic.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad. Thank you for taking the time and being so welcoming about all this. Jeff and I go way back to Turok, so that's how we met. I was a big fan back in the day.
Nick is evidence of the power of the architecture for dialogue, because I used to give out my email address in interviews and things like that. I would get thousands and thousands of emails, and Nick was one of them. And I would take care to try and answer all of them. And Nick was just brilliant. So we've maintained a correspondence after all these years.
Thank you. Well, my question is in relation to the collective journey. I've followed your work for some time, and I noticed, when you first started talking about it years ago, say pre-pandemic, it definitely was revolutionary that you introduced it. But after the events of the recent years, you see a lot more daily disruption, chaos. It seems like almost every headline that comes out is both sudden, surprising, and big in its scope, and there's so much happening. How do you think the collective journey can be utilized to not just influence daily events, but also I've noticed that these events are having an effect on the entertainment business as well. So how, considering the level of exponential chaos that we're seeing, how can the collective journey be utilized to have a positive impact in today's climate?
I'm seeing very interesting things coming out of Gen Z, young people who had the clarity to see the potential of the internet, and who are crushed by the combination of the disruption of the internet and the pandemic. So this generation knows the difference between the two, and they're young enough to be pissed about it. They're young enough to be angry. They're teaching their younger siblings, the generation after Gen Z, which I think they're calling Gen A or something like that. They're making themselves aware that this is exhausting and intolerable. And they are starting, I believe, they are starting to self-organize and create little mini systems, little swirls in the chaos that is starting to push back at this nonsense. And the way that they're doing that, again, is strangely is similar to the real world model, where they're forming audio-visual clusters and teaching one another how these things are happening and what the methodology is. They're tracking bad actors across multiple social media platforms and informing on them so that they can gird themselves, so that they can defend themselves and teach others. It's a kind of self-defense. What do I do when something is making me angry on the internet? Well, here are the 5 things to do to discern whether this is fact or fiction. Boom, 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 boom. And they're teaching. So I have a tiny bit of faith that we are not going to tolerate this for too much longer, and that there will be a movement to counter it. And once you know the trick, once you know how they're gaslighting you, it's really hard to get gaslit again.
Thank you for that question, Nick. And we have Gene here as well, who's one of our youngest members of the Justice for Hire community. So would love to get this question from. Let me get you on the screen. Where'd you go?
Well,
Gene, what's going on?
not much. All right. How are you, Jeff?
Doing all right.
Yeah. So I don't really know if the question makes sense or not. So when I was listening to your story about like you as like a kid, like getting attacked, and then just a bunch of the stuff that you went through growing up. Lately, for me personally, I haven't really been in like the right state of mind. I've had a lot of stuff happening, so mentally, I haven't been there. But what's been helping me out a lot is art, but also looking back at like stuff that I've gone through and listening to your story. I would like to know like what best advice could you give to like all of us here, or like other people that might be watching. I don't know if like Jan's recording right now, but like to other people who are going to be watching like the video later of this interview. What is the best advice that you can give on like sharing your story and like characters like the ones that we have on Justice for Hire and ReelwUrld?
The advice that I would give, it's interesting because you're creating a participative universe. I'm reminded of the earliest storytelling that I did, which was in fantasy role-playing games. So effectively, one of the first role-playing games I ever was in that I didn't run was called Villains and Vigilantes. And we were around a table, essentially being Justice for Hire. But the methodology is this. You need to understand what the underlying narrative is about with whatever the story that it is that you're telling. Understand why you're telling that story. If you're telling that story because it's got a cool twist and a neat gimmick and so forth, that's all right, but it's not going to last very long. You can have some fun and then move on. But if you have something like what you've got with Justice for Hire, there are deep narrative foundations to that story. So you have to go to the visionary and ask them questions about the narrative and what its meaning is, what it symbolizes, why we're telling this to people, what are people going to get out of this story. And then part two is, what does it mean to you as a person? How does this resonate with your life? What is interesting about it to you that touches on trauma, that touches on passion? Find yourself in the story. That way, when you get on your social media, you have a following, man. It's lots of people. Those people care about you. They're at least vaguely interested, or they think you look cute or whatever. But when you say, I've been working with this story and here's what it means to me, what do you think? And then you put the link or something like that, you are leaving them with a question. You're disclosing something about yourself, which is touching. Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that about Jean. And then you're asking me a question. So I'm like, well, I want to answer that question. So I think I have to hit this link to see what Jean is talking about. And so now I'm involved with the story and the characters with the intent to answer the question, right? Because you involved me. That's the architecture for dialogue. What do you think? What's your take on this very important topic, which is really meaningful to me? That's how I get the most responses on social media, the most hits on the articles that I want you to look at. It grows audiences. It's what we're doing with Ultraman. What the heck is Ultraman? It's a kind of goofy thing when you think about it, right? But what does he stand for? What is it to be Ultra? What is it? Why is he here fighting these giant monsters? What's going on with that universe? And why is it meaningful to me and was when I was a child and so forth? So I've been engaged in that conversation with thousands of fans, and they're growing every week. There's thousands more, you know. So it works. It works if you do it like that.
Thank you for that question, Jane. And well, we have two more, I think. We have David and Vintage, maybe Autumn as well. So we have, let's go with David, aka Creator, also from the JFH Cinematic Universe.
Hi, how are you?
Hey.
So I just have a quick question. I'm actually at work, but I wrote my question in the group chat so I don't forget it. Do you think that the creative aspect has died down, this meaning that there's more remakes instead of new ideas?
I love that you come with your own soundtrack. You know, I saw you post that question, and it's a good one. You know, what is happening right now, guys, is that the entertainment industry got gummed up about 2 years ago, and the entertainment industry is on 3-year cycles. So what's happening is that in this coming year, there's actually going to be less and less content from Hollywood, less and less content from video game companies. There are going to be fewer releases over the course of the next year or so. It's strange how slow everything is in the pipeline, but it's going to be shocking how few. Even right now, there's only a handful of movies that come out every month. There used to be a couple of dozen movies would come out every month. And it's only going to get less and less. And the problem with that, guys, is that if there's going to be less that comes out, they're going to rely more on the tried and true, which is where these franchises are coming from, where there's going to be even more Marvel movies than there were before, and more remakes and things like that. So unfortunately, you're going to see a lot of repetition in terms of you know, it's the same story world, or it's a remake and so forth, and not as much original content. Fortunately, these things do work in cycles, and after the pandemic is over, it's going to take a couple of years, but after there's some recoupment, there's going to be this kind of, we're going to be tired of it. We're going to want something new. And that's where content that Jan and his team are come in, and that's where content that I am just beginning to develop right now that that will be coming out in a couple of years, that is entirely original, and I'm so excited about it.
Thanks for that, Creator, David, aka Creator. And we got Vintage next. Let me pin you.
Vintage.
Blessings, Jeff. Hey. So before I pose my question, I'd like to honor and emphasize what you said regarding love, and how that is essentially going to, you know, bring us to the place we all want to live in, you know. Like, I've been observing a lot of similar patterns in the collective community, and it shows up in the people that I interact with on an everyday basis. Like, we're all aware of ego and how it has its own narrative. But then when we're going through that narrative, we suddenly say, hey, your narrative isn't valid anymore. And me being on the outskirts of that, in the shadows, just observing, I notice it. And then I try to jump in the light. And then I try to make it known that that's happening. But because those narratives are already running, it's really hard for me to like be like, hey, this is what's happening. And so I kind of just like have to let it go sometimes. And so love, like holding that space, that aura of love does so much. And I think it's beyond this tangible realm, you know, like even today, as I was listening to this call, I was walking throughout New York City, and I noticed this homeless man. He was sitting on the train by himself, and it kind of invoked some sadness in me. But I realized that there's no point in me feeling sad, you know? It's not really, it's important to acknowledge it. But so what I did was like, I kind of imagined him in his inner child, and I kind of just like patted him on his back and like just sent him some love, you know?
Oh.
because it's sickening, man. Like this, it's not sickening, but it's just what's happening. But there's so many cycles that play out, and I see it every day as I live in New York City, like homeless people. And I continue walking today, and then someone asked me for money because they were from somewhere else and they wanted food, and it's like I can help him, but then the same role will play again and again. So I loved what you said regarding, you know, changing the system first. And I know that media is a very large part of it, right? And so I want to shoot more content with me going through this process of synthesizing all this information, right? But when I take out my camera to record, it kind of takes me out of that dissection process, that synthesizing. And so I guess my question is, how can I go through this initiation, this processing of all this data, this mastering of energy, while producing content and making it as authentic as possible?
Oh my gosh. You know, the headwind that we are up against as artists, it doesn't stop. You know, when you put something out there, I just put out a piece of animation called an initiation to game B, which I put the link in the chat. I spent a year producing this animation, helping to design the narrative, and you know, a lot of money was spent creating it, and it was it's essentially an idea for how collective journey narrative can be applied to change the world. It is under complete attack. There are organizations that have assembled themselves just to tear it to pieces. And I've gotten a few black and blues from it, you know, and it's just amazing to me that there's a group called Dark Renaissance who assemble just to smash the thing to pieces, and have talks about it and stuff like that, because of how wrong it is. And we, you know, I'm thinking to myself, is this worth it? You know, do we you know, touch homeless people? Do we, you know, do we put ourselves out there? You know, and the thing is, you know, Vintage, it makes all the difference in the world to do so. All the difference in the world. I would have lost if somebody had not paid some kind of attention to me, acknowledged my work in the affirmative, you know, or told their story in a way that inspired me. they don't even know me, but they caused me to move forward one single day, and that made all the difference. So, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but the thing is, we've got to proceed. We've got to keep expressing ourselves, and the advice I give to people who are being attacked by trolls is, you know what? We have to either ignore them completely, which is extremely difficult. We pick at them like we pick at scabs, or love them and speak back to them out of love, which means that you're not engaging or arguing with a troll. That's often useless. But to let them know that you validate and celebrate their participation in the architecture for dialogue, and you speak to your story, your essence, your resonance back to them in some vague way that you might think that they understand, not in some obnoxious way where you're using language that they don't understand, but some vague way that you think they will understand. Sometimes they jump over. Sometimes they're your friend in class the next day. So I'm sorry, did I answer your question? You got me all inspired.
You somewhat did. But I guess to clarify a little bit more.
Tell me.
You're right. It does make a difference, and I was embodying that as I was walking, because another lady lost her phone. Like, I could tell that she was looking for something. I didn't know what, and so I asked her because it was in my field of awareness, and I didn't want to ignore it.
Sure.
So I'm just like, hey, do you need help with anything? And then that person asking the money, I tune my full attention to him as well, because sometimes presence is the most potent medicine that we can give someone.
Of course.
So you're right. And like, my question was like, how can I go through all this processing of this data and still produce content, like, or am I supposed to like just go through this and not produce content, But then it brings me back like, yo, content is very important. Media will, do a lot for this world.
Yes.
So I'm like, going back and forth, like, do I shoot content right now or should I not? Yeah.
Hey, dude, always make stuff, man. Always make stuff. Make beautiful things. Don't let anything stop you from doing that. If you can't devote your full time to it, or there's a financial issue or something like that, everything you need is in your pocket. That's something that this Lucanis guy lives by. Your entire production facility is in that little mobile device. So just keep making stuff, because you never know what's going to hit or who you're going to move. But finish it, man. Finish the thing. If somebody does something brilliantly, but it's not finished, I can't do anything with it. If somebody finishes something and it's pretty good, I can make it better. And that's all the difference in the world. That's how people get discovered, and that's how great stories get told.
Thank you for your wisdom, man.
Thank you so much, Jeff, for those for all of this, and thank you, Vintage, for that question. Vintage is he's one of the day one JFH heroes. Very, very grateful.
I recognize him from the videos.
And to kind of touch on, I just have to say one thing about the concept of creating and of going through something, and perhaps this I want to say this earlier when Gene was speaking, and Vintage is definitely pulling it out of me. When you're going through something, well, at least in my experience, when I'm going through something, I thought about this years ago, and part of the process of rebooting Justice for Hire, contemplating whether or not to help the world be better while you're working on yourself. To who am I to say something when I need to fix this about myself? But like, we have to, and that is part of the experience. That, and I think it's so important to allow yourself to do that, to go out into the world and to make those choices. And that goes right down to creating content. I'm going through something, but I have to log it. And whether that's a diary or a voice recording, I don't really write as much as I do voice recordings now. But if I see it for Justice for Hire, because I'm a character in Justice for Hire, if I see this moment being something that feels cinematic, it feels like if I shoot this right now, other people can feel it too. When I feel that, I pull out my phone and I shoot. And even if it's a 5-second video, it's on my phone right now. And I know that I can connect these dots in this story, because what cinema is today, where we are right now, we're all in film school. We are back in the days of Charlie Chaplin. And if you watch Charlie Chaplin, what he's done, what he did in the 1920s is the closest thing to social media. The way it's formatted, image and text. Sometimes there's music, and to see how raw and beautiful, and how, my son started watching Charlie Chaplin at 4, and he totally got it. Like, that's the level of clarity of the message that Charlie was putting on screen through his storytelling. And I think we can all learn from that, and capturing, and how easy we have it compared to how they had it back in the day. It's exactly in our pocket. And all we do is show it, and we can show an image, we can write some text, and now you can just add some music on any social media platform, and the artist makes money and you make money. Like, all that's great. And we can really tell our stories in a different way. And there's no model for this, because it hasn't been, we are in uncharted territory, and whatever we do is okay. We're going to figure it all out together. And I love being in this collective journey with all of you. And I'm so grateful for Jeff for being such a shining light forward for all of us. So thank you, Jeff, for your time, for the massive amount of inspiration and education. I have to go back and like scan through this, because I'm like, he said these 5 things for the Transmedia breakdown that breaks down 12. So I'm gonna be able to. And Jeff, I know that you have before we end, you have, I saw an ad for you mentioned that you have some projects coming out in a couple of years. I saw an ad for your animation endeavor on WeFunder, which has the guy from Pencilish associated as your lead investor, which is awesome. So I mean, this is everything we're doing is so wonderfully integrated across these great partnerships like WeFunder. They're wonderful people over there. So do you want to share anything else to let everybody know that that's happening?
A few things that I'm working on. I'm teaming up with 2 other companies. My company, Starlight Runner. There's a company where I'm at right now, Elevate, which is based in Columbus, Ohio. And there's a third company based in Los Angeles, a studio called New Rock Stars. We have joined forces to become Iceberg Theory. So there's still a Starlight Runner, but now I have a joint venture called Iceberg Theory that is working on creating incredible Ultraman content. So we're teaming with Subaraya Productions. I'm involved in the various Netflix Ultraman projects. We do a monthly live stream Ultraman show on ultramanconnection.com. And that universe is building itself out and growing very, very rapidly into one of these, transmedia story worlds. So that's been hugely exciting. I am also joining forces with a dear friend of mine named Ashley Eckstein. You might know her as Ahsoka Tano from the Star Wars animated shows. And we're teaming up to create a brand new original intellectual property I can't talk about it too much, but working with her, it's so funny because I've been watching Star Wars animation for, like 15 years now. And to actually, to talk to her on the phone is like mind blowing. It's so much fun. So we're working together on that. And we'll be ready to announce in a few months, I think, what it is and how cool it is and how transmedia it is. And I'm continuing to work on transmedia population activation. I'm doing my best to create ways for all of us to be more literate about media, to understand the new storytelling modalities so that we can stand up to, bad actors, people who are trying to mess with us. And, that's an ongoing project that I have right now as well.
Well, Jeff, thank you again. Thank you so much for being so supportive of me personally over the years. I wrote a little bit on social media today that I feel like you're, one of the only people in media that ever saw me as truly. And
I shared that.
So well, it's a big deal to know you, to love you, to learn from you. And to have you on board with ReelwUrld means a lot as well. And so thank you so much for coming on to the Value Add Podcast. ReelwUrld's the Value Add Podcast. We added that so when you search it, you can find it much faster because apparently there's another value add, but it's not this one. So thank you so much. And of course, everybody, if you want to become a part of what we're building with ReelwUrld, that you can invest on WeFunder at wefunder.com/ReelwUrld, ReelWurld. And we can put a link in the little chat here. And also Justice for Hire, our first show. We did millions of views on our first episode, and the TikTok community really, we stayed away from TikTok for such a long time because we knew that that's the culture that we wanted. So we wanted to be prepared for it. We put out our first episode, it went viral overnight, and we're just so grateful for all the followers and fans across all the platforms. But everything's happening in one place, and that's justiceforhire.app. So you can go there right now. It's a mobile first experience. You can join the cast and become part of it. You own your own character in Justice for Hire, which is something that Jeff and I have talked about for the longest time. That's been a blocker for studios to be able to do what we're doing. Is essentially to say, hey, anybody who is contributing to a story should own their story. And that is something that has been a hard no for lots of IP, lots of intellectual properties, lots of story worlds and franchises that could really benefit from it. And so we're doing it first at ReelwUrld. We're doing it together, and we're gonna show the entire industry that, hey, doing stuff together is more fun and creates more opportunity for monetization if we all work together and we can all rise together. So that's we're doing it first on Justice for Hire, and we're gonna do more worlds like that. Jeff eventually will have a world on Justice for Hire on ReelwUrld. Someday soon. So thank you all. Check it out.
Thank you. Join me on my social media at Jeff_Gomez on Twitter. You can look me up on LinkedIn and Facebook. I'm pretty easy to find. And also tune into my podcast. It's a brand new one. It's called Cosmic Street Corner. Easy enough to find. So join me on the Cosmic Street Corner. Thank you all. You've been brilliant. Your questions were magnificent. Truly appreciate it, Jen. Thank you.
Thank you. And Jeff, before we go, one more thing. I had so many questions for you that I did not ask, and I don't want you to answer any of them. I just want you to hear what I would have asked. I'm going to read the first sentence of a few of them. Why is Marvel cooler than Star Wars? Why is every media company a propaganda machine? Chewie not getting a medal at the end of Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope, is an example of deeply ingrained institutionalized racism that still needs to be corrected. Let's see what else we have here. Here we go. The humanity's vision of life in space is laughable. And though that was a question to essentially lead into Star Trek seasons one, the Next Generation seasons 1 through 4, and only a few episodes of the animation based on the original Star Trek series.
Jan, you're going to have to invite me back.
Yeah, and so I just want you to know that there was a lot of stuff on here that I didn't get to talk about with you.
Oh my
But
God.
love you so much, and thank you guys, thank you everybody. Have a great night, and we'll be posting this. It'll be live tomorrow.
Fantastic, guys. Good night.
Love you.
Hi,
Thank
Jeff.
you.
Thank